I can't stand him. He hurts me a lot. So hopefully, this offseason we find a way to get back.
Joel Embiid just opened up about how he truly feels about Paul George. But that's only the beginning. He also explained why so many NBA players have issues with him. The main reason? Paul allegedly leaked private information from a locker room meeting. Here's the full story. The Miami meeting that changed everything. Turns out, a lot of players aren't fans of Paul George. For Joel Embiid, the issues began during a team meeting in Miami. But to understand it fully, we need the full backstory. The Philadelphia Sixers were seen as true title contenders. When Paul George signed a 4-year, $212 million deal in July 2024 to form the new Big Three with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, expectations were sky high. This wasn't just another big-name signing. It was Philadelphia's shot at their first NBA title since 1983. But by November 2024, those dreams had crumbled into chaos. The Sixers were just 2-11, and tensions were rising fast. What happened in Miami that night revealed the toxic cracks in what was supposed to be a dream team. And it all began with a 90-minute meeting that changed everything.
A team that's 2-11, they're in a free fall right now. Obviously, when you get Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, Paul George together, a 2-11 start, this isn't what you're expecting.
Players were frustrated, coaches looked lost, and the pressure of those massive contracts was weighing heavily on everyone. But what no one saw coming was 24-year-old Tyrese Maxey stepping up and delivering a message that would shake the entire NBA. Maxey called out Embiid over his constant tardiness, telling the former MVP that his lateness was tearing down the team's foundation. And this wasn't just about being a little late to practice. It went way beyond that. Team meetings, film sessions, flights, buses, team meals, Joel Embiid was consistently late to nearly every team activity. And that behavior was creating a ripple effect that was poisoning the locker room culture from the inside out.
To be on time for team activities and saying that there's a trickle-down effect. When you are missing, when you are tardy, when you are late for what I was told everything was the line.
The confrontation was raw, emotional, and long overdue. Here was their young star, barely old enough to rent a car without paying extra, calling out a veteran who had just won Olympic gold and was earning over $50 million a year. But Maxey didn't back down. That meeting was meant to be sacred, a players-only sanctuary where teammates could be honest, settle issues, and move forward without any outside interference. These meetings are common in pro sports, and there's an unwritten rule: what happens in the locker room stays there. It's about trust, unity, and knowing that tough conversations are sometimes necessary to build something real. But less than 24 hours later, that trust was shattered. ESPN's Shams Charania reported detailed accounts of the meeting, including near word-for-word quotes of what Maxey told Embiid. Someone had broken the code, and Embiid was livid. He called the leaker a real piece of expletive and said he would never join another team meeting again. His words hit hard. It's tough being around people that do that kind of stuff. Once that line is crossed, don't expect me back in those meetings. The betrayal ran deep. This wasn't just basketball, it was supposed to be family. These men were expected to have each other's backs, and someone had sold out the brotherhood. For what? Media clout? Podcast views? The very trust that holds a team together had been shattered. What made it worse was that in a July 2025 ESPN profile, Embiid revealed he knew exactly who the leaker was. He could have exposed them and destroyed their reputation but chose silence instead, saying, "The past is the past," even though the damage was done. And that's when things got really interesting, because this is where Paul George enters the picture in a way no one saw coming. George echoed Embiid's outrage, even saying on his podcast, "I don't know how the hell Shams got that story or how it even leaked." Both stars reportedly wanted to find out who did it. On the surface, it looked like they were united. But online speculation began swirling that George might have been the one who leaked it. Think about it, this is a guy with a major podcast brand, Podcast P, who thrives on media buzz. Fans on social media began calling him out, with posts like, "Man, I see what nobody says, it was Paul George who leaked that stuff about Embiid and them."
George obviously just got there, probably didn't feel as if he's the right guy yet in that locker room to talk about anything happening, especially with how bad the start of the year has been with him being on a team.
Circumstantial evidence kept building. George was the new guy on the team, someone who maybe didn't fully grasp the sacred code of locker room trust. He also had a track record of questionable media decisions throughout his career. Clickbait videos fueled the fire with titles like "Joel Embiid explodes at Paul George for leaking 76ers private talk," even though no solid proof tied George to the leak. But at that point, it didn't matter. The damage was done. Whether he leaked it or not, the rumors alone turned the atmosphere toxic. Trust was already fragile, and this shattered it. Embiid grew distant, refusing to participate in future team meetings. The chemistry that was supposed to push them toward a championship began falling apart. And to make matters worse, reports said Embiid had preferred reuniting with Jimmy Butler instead of signing George. Apparently, Embiid never fully supported the George move in the first place. So now, not only was there locker room tension, but also doubts about whether the team's core even wanted to be teammates. That infamous Miami meeting became a turning point. The Sixers spiraled, ending the season with a miserable 24-58 record, their worst since 2015-16, and missed the playoffs. The Big Three plan had officially imploded, and the fallout from that leaked meeting played a massive part in their collapse. But this was only the beginning. Beginning of this wasn't just a story about the Miami meeting. It was part of a much bigger issue: why so many NBA players had grown to dislike Paul George. That locker room leak brought attention to deeper concerns about George's character and how he acted as a teammate. The real problem wasn't whether he leaked the info, it was that people believed he could. That moment planted seeds of distrust that grew into a larger story, filled with conflicts and drama from throughout George's career. The Miami leak wasn't a one-time issue. It was just the latest example of a pattern: Paul George stirring up problems wherever he went. As Joel Embiid grew more frustrated with George, it became clear that the problem went deeper than one leaked meeting. The NBA is a small world, and word travels fast when a player keeps bringing drama and breaking trust. Embiid was realizing what other players had already figured out: Paul George had a habit of creating conflict and leaving when things got hard. George later said playing with Embiid was tough because of a lack of championship habits, but he tried to make it sound like a team issue instead of owning his part in it. The sad thing was, George and Embiid actually had similar careers, but not in a good way. Both were often injured, both were criticized for missing games while making huge salaries, and both had reputations as difficult teammates. But there was one key difference: Embiid took responsibility for his issues and kept trying. George just kept blaming others. But his issues didn't stop with the Sixers. His career was full of broken relationships and beefs with other players. One of the most well-known was his feud with Damian Lillard, a rivalry that showed exactly why people had grown to dislike George. It started in the 2019 playoffs when Lillard hit a wild 37-foot buzzer beater to eliminate George's Thunder. Instead of giving Lillard credit, George called it a bad shot, a petty response that became part of his image. Lillard simply responded with LOL. But George couldn't let it go. Things got worse in the 2020 bubble when he and Patrick Beverley mocked Lillard after he missed free throws. That kind of trash talk rubbed players the wrong way. Instead of showing class, George chose to kick a man while he was down. Lillard fired back, reminding him that he'd already eliminated both George and Beverley from the playoffs, and delivered the brutal line: "Keep switching teams, running from the grind. You boys chumps." And it hit hard. George had earned a rep as someone who avoided challenges rather than facing them head-on. His beef with Devin Booker exposed more of the same. George had once looked at Booker as a little bro, but during the 2021 Western Conference Finals, that relationship blew up. Booker later said it started then and never got better. George admitted things got heated, but blamed Booker: it came from his end. Even when he was part of the problem, George always found a way to shift the blame. His issue with Chris Paul went even deeper. Paul had once helped him find a doctor for his eye surgery, a sign of a good relationship. But in their 2021 playoff series, words were exchanged, and George got offended. Instead of brushing it off, he called it "little man syndrome" and made it clear the friendship was over. This petty, grudge-holding side of George pushed others away. Even within his own team, George was hard to deal with. During the 2020 Clippers collapse, he got into a heated exchange with Montrezl Harrell about defense. Harrell reportedly snapped, "You're always right. Nobody can tell you nothing." That arrogance made George tough to play with. What frustrated players even more was that George was clearly talented. A 9-time All-Star with elite skills on both ends. But his drama and inability to connect with teammates always overshadowed his game. The pattern repeated itself over and over. He'd join a team with big expectations, things would go south, relationships would fall apart, and he'd move on. From the Pacers to the Thunder, to the Clippers, to the Sixers, he left behind a trail of frustration. Embiid wasn't seeing something new, he was seeing the same thing that had played out with every team George had been on. This wasn't a one-time issue. It was who Paul George had always been, a player who created tension, ducked accountability, and bailed when it got hard. A 2025 anonymous NBA player poll in The Athletic showed just how disliked George had become. Players named him among the most overrated, pointing to his constant team hopping and playoff letdowns. But it wasn't just about numbers, it was about respect. Players said George constantly complained about his role. He wanted more time handling the ball but also wanted to play off-ball. That kind of have it both ways attitude drove teammates nuts. Worse, it seemed like he cared more about building his media brand than winning games. His podcast, Podcast P, became a symbol of this. Here was a guy making $50 million a year, not performing well, and spending his time on content creation instead of helping his team. Critics slammed him for podcasting during one of the NBA's most disappointing team seasons. The leak in Philly was just the latest sign. Whether or not George was actually the one who leaked the meeting didn't even matter anymore. The fact that everyone thought it was him said everything. In a locker room, when trust breaks, it's the player with the worst rep who gets blamed first. But his bad reputation with players wasn't the whole story. If you really want to understand why so many people, Joel Embiid included, grew tired of Paul George, you have to look at his entire career. A 15-year journey full of letdowns, bad decisions, and always running when things got tough. The sad part is, George didn't start out this way. At first, fans loved rooting for him. He was an underdog who had to fight for a spot, playing at Fresno State and earning his way to the NBA. He worked hard and climbed the ranks, starting as a bench player with the Pacers before taking over when Danny Granger got hurt. He bounced back from a terrible leg injury and looked like a success story, someone who beat the odds and earned stardom. But somewhere along the line, something changed. The hardworking kid became someone who expected things to be handed to him. It started in the 2017 playoffs against the Cavaliers. After CJ Miles missed a game winner, George publicly called him out instead of backing his teammate. That moment showed weak leadership, and it would define George from then on. Karma hit fast. When he had a chance to hit the game winner later in the series, George choked, shooting 23% and missing badly. From that point on, his playoff reputation went downhill. Big talk, big predictions, then disappointing performances when it mattered most. In OKC, he mocked Donovan Mitchell before their playoff series, only to be outplayed by the rookie. Mitchell averaged 28 a game and sent George packing. That year should have been George's comeback. In 2019, he was elite, 28 points a game, strong defense, MVP, and DPOY votes. But in the playoffs, Dame Lillard crushed him with that now iconic deep three. George's reaction? Still petty. He called it a bad shot. That sore loser energy made fans and players alike lose respect. The Clippers trade was supposed to be his big moment. The team gave up everything, for unprotected picks, a protected 1-2 pick swaps, Danilo Gallinari, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. It was all for George, to pair him with Kawhi. The hype was huge. Billboards declared them the new kings of LA. But what followed was a disaster. They blew a 3-1 lead to the Nuggets. George had just 10 points in Game 7, hitting only 2 of 11 from deep. Fans called him Pandemic P, a brutal nickname that stuck. The Clippers' title hopes vanished, and George took the blame. But the problems kept coming. He missed games due to injury while demanding a supermax contract with a no-trade clause. Fans paid to see him play, but he sat out while asking for more money and control. At 34, after failing in LA, George went to Philly and made the same promises. Said he wanted to retire there. Said he was going back to his bully mentality. But once again, it fell apart fast. The Sixers started 2-12. George played poorly, got hurt, and instead of focusing on getting better, he turned the whole thing into podcast content. Fans were furious. He was making $50 million a year, barely playing, and using their team's struggles as clickbait. They called him a full-time podcaster and questioned if he even cared about the game. It wasn't just that he was underperforming. It was that he seemed more focused on his brand than on winning. Social media ripped into him, ranking him among the most disliked players for always under-delivering and always making excuses. They called him a third-place guy, a nod to his many All-NBA third-team selections but never reaching the top. That summed up the frustration. George always had talent, but never delivered in the biggest moments. And the podcast? That just symbolized what people hated most about modern NBA stars, players putting personal brands ahead of team success. Joel Embiid's frustration wasn't surprising. It was the same story George had written with every team. He wasn't going to change. He wasn't going to become more dependable. He wasn't going to stop creating drama or chasing clout. He was 34. This was who he was. The Miami leak wasn't about one conversation. It was about a career built on broken trust, letdowns, and selfish choices. Whether he leaked it or not didn't even matter. People believed he could because of everything that came before. Embiid's realization wasn't new. It was just the first time someone said what the whole league already knew. Paul George had become a toxic teammate who failed in big moments, caused chemistry issues, and put himself above the game. The only surprise was that it took this long for anyone to say it.